This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
G'day, I'm Kate Watson. Murray Shaw is one of two executive producers of the Olympics for Channel 9. With the opening ceremony sending us into full Olympic mode this weekend, I wanted to talk to him about how it gets from Paris to our screens. Murray's in charge of all that. He's the newsmaker, and he's been planning this for the best part of 18 months. He's a self-confessed sports nut, and you can hear his excitement for the games as he talks to me about what his job entails, the events he can't wait to see, the athletes whose names you won't know now but might know before the games is out, and for those who love an Olympics moment, how you can make sure you don't miss a thing. If you aren't an Olympics fan, you might be thinking this one's not for you. I'll challenge that and say if what we all need is a dose of good news, I reckon you'll find a way to get around it.
Hello, it's Christy here from the Squiz Kids podcast, letting you know that we're rolling out a heap of kid-friendly Olympics content over the next few weeks, including the Squiz Kids Olympic Sprint, a morning update on all the games action that's happened overnight. So if you've got some small but mighty sports fans in your household, search for Squiz Kids in your favourite podcasting app.
Murray, your job title is EP of the Olympics, executive producer of the Olympics. Talk to me, just to set this up, about your day-to-day. What is the job, even just an executive producer, not just, I guess, when it comes to sport? What does an EP do?
Well, first things first, there's two EPs for the Olympics because the Olympics is so big and because neither of us want to do 24 hours a day. And the Olympics, as we'll get to no doubt a little bit later on, we're basically broadcasting for 22 out of the 24 hours. So a lot of the job of the EP is helping to understand the editorial that's going to air. There's obviously, that's once we hit the start date, once the cauldron's lit and once the Olympics is underway, but there's obviously been plenty that's gone into it in the previous 18 months of just getting this ready. A lot of meetings, as you can imagine, because this is one of the biggest things that not only Channel 9 but Australian television, you'd have to say, has undertaken. So there's been plenty of planning, and then once the game starts, it's what we're actually putting to air and what we're seeing on television and making sure that we capture all the stories that the Australian public want to see.
Why do you love sport? Like, what do you love about it?
Because it's reality television at its finest. So, for example, Rowing Australia gave us access to their selection criteria. So we've literally been filming athletes being told that they're not going to the Olympics, and that is brutal. If you spent 4 years training to do something only to get told that you're not going, that's sort of like the end of a dream, and then to be able to pick that up and then go again. So it's those sort of stories, and not just hard luck stories. Obviously, what we end up seeing is people winning Olympic gold medals at the end of it, and they're the great stories. And so, I mean, sport, what do they always say? You read the front of the paper for the bad news and you read the back of the paper for the good news, that old cliche. So that's why I've always loved sport.
You started as a presenter. Did you deliberately move into sort of the backroom mechanics, or was that was the sports journo Murray Shaw the dream? Or
well, no, I started as a presenter in radio and then moved across to television, and I have a great head for radio. So I quickly worked out that TV presenting wasn't for me, and maybe someone else worked out that TV presenting wasn't for me, and then I just sort of moved into the back room, but have thoroughly enjoyed doing the production side rather than the presenting side too. And, I guess having started like that, you get a great appreciation for the job that those amazing presenters that we use do and the work that they put into it. It isn't just turning up and standing in front of a camera and, talking about a sport. They do an enormous amount of research before they get on air. That's presenters, and commentators are exactly the same. The ability of great commentators to be able to capture a moment. And you think about great Olympic moments, really, whether it's Norman May saying gold, 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 and some of those great calls of Bruce McAvaney, of Kathy Freeman, they just live with us forever, and they do an incredible job, and the Olympics brings out the best of them.
I assume that one of the things you potentially didn't anticipate in your career is that you would be in more of a management role, managing people, managing a huge team of people to pull this together. Is that an adjustment from, originally starting on air and presenters and commentators, they work with a team, but, it's a smaller cohort. You're managing, I would assume, a huge team when it comes to the Olympics.
Yeah, so there's going to be about 150 odd people on the ground in Paris and about 300 working back in Sydney on the Olympics in a sort of split production, if you like, or a remote production. And look, the Olympics is happening overnight, so the best bits are going to be happening at 4 o'clock in the morning for swimming finals, for example. So there's there's a lot of people that are going to be putting in some long hours, and with long hours comes frayed edges. And I suppose part of the role of the EPs is going to be making sure that everyone's working together for the same common goal, if you like, keeping everyone in good spirits, because a great team that's enjoying what they're doing is going to produce a better product.
You mentioned before planning has been, I think you said 18 months or so.
Yeah.
When do you begin planning for an Olympics?
Well, usually you'd probably have a 4-year run-in. Obviously, the Olympics is every 4 years, but Channel 9 obviously only acquired the rights halfway through that sort of 4 years. So the Olympics unit, if you like, at Channel 9 has sort of been up and running in a full-scale nature for around about 18 months. Mm-hmm. So there's, as I said, it's been a lot of people working very hard to get us to where we are now. And usually, for example, with our predecessors, they'd have a commentary team for every Olympics pretty much that doesn't change. Well, we had to build the commentary team from scratch. We made a decision to go out and shoot with athletes in their environment too, because we wanted to, get to know the athletes, form a relationship with both them and their sporting organisations. So we were starting from a long way behind, but through a lot of hard work, we're pretty confident that we're going to get there in the end.
I want to talk to you about the way that we get the vision of the Olympics. So as I understand it, the IOC owns the broadcast.
That's correct.
They sell it onto networks like yourselves.
Yep.
And then you are able to put anything that they provide to you to air? Is that how does that actually work? I think for people who don't work in TV, they don't work in media, how does that happen?
Well, a lot of that's changed over the course of time, but essentially now the IOC has their own broadcast arm called OBS, or Olympic Broadcasting Services, who are the cameras that you will see at the swimming, for example, every night. And then we can choose, as we will, to maybe add a couple of cameras, because obviously if you think about a broadcast of a swimming race, if you're broadcasting it for the world, you're going to focus on who's coming first as they touch the wall. But if you're broadcasting for an Australian audience, you want to focus on where that Australian finishes. So then we will add a camera on top of the OBS cameras to be able to focus on the Australians in the race, or to be able to focus on the relatives, parents, and siblings, wives, husbands of the Australians in that race and be able to shoot their reaction. Or, as you might have seen at the last Olympics, it might be their coach who was shaking the railings, of course, when Ariane Titmus won. So
that
all those
Dean Boxall footage is gold, right?
Exactly, which is why you have cameras at the swimming to be able to capture that. Yeah,
I can understand that for something like the swimming, you know we're going to win medals.
Yep.
So I would assume Nine would make a significant investment in putting cameras on those events.
Extra cameras, yeah.
What about those events where you get a surprise win, or how you've gone through every event, I assume, and anticipated how we might perform and made decisions about how you place your cameras at those events?
Yeah, so a mixed zone, for example, for those people who aren't sure, is where an athlete will walk into after they've finished their event to be interviewed by broadcasters from around the world. So we then also have to book positions at mixed zones, so that if an athlete has finished, we have a reporter and a camera there to be able to interview them. So then we also need to make sure that we've got cameras in mixed zones and reporters in mixed zones so that we can get those interviews with the athletes once they're finished.
I wondered about that. So you've got 150 people on the ground, most of those cameras and reporters?
Yep. Well, of the 150 people, obviously a lot of them are commentators, hosts and reporters.
Yep.
But there'd be sort of well over a dozen cameramen who are travelling around with reporters to make sure that they're at every sport where we feel the Australians will do well, and to cover every possible Australian as well as we can. There's obviously about 450 Australians, I think there is, competing at the Olympics in Paris. So we want to make sure that we're probably trying to capture as many of them as we can.
When you're watching an Olympics, and I have watched them all, love sport. What I didn't realise until I worked in TV was obviously there's someone making a decision about what to cut to at any given moment.
Yep.
That would have been a very different job, I imagine, when it was just one channel and that was it. You're making a decision. So this is our primary channel, and we're going to cut here, there, and everywhere, and make a decision based on how an Aussie might be performing. Now you have all of these digital channels, all these different, platforms, channels you can do that with. How are you thinking about talking to the people watching about where they should go?
So let's go back a step. We sort of talked about the role of OBS, the Olympic Broadcasting Service, who are now responsible for putting the cameras into every venue and then producing the broadcast of those sports. So there are over 40 sports in this case that are now being broadcast, and OBS now make individual sports channels available for streaming services or digital services. So if you are a badminton fan and particularly just want to watch the badminton, or if you are a synchronised swimming fan and just want to watch the synchronised swimming, or whatever sport it might be, they are now available. And when you think about where we were, even the last time that Channel 9 did the Olympics, which was 2012 in London, they worked side by side with Foxtel, and I think if I remember that rightly, Foxtel had a couple of channels. Channel 9 just had one channel. For this Olympics, we'll have 2 curated channels, as well as those 40 sports channels that I just talked about that are provided by OBS, available for streaming on 9 now. Just the ability to be able to watch what you watch. And then if you go back to what you're saying, those curated channels, then what we're showing on them is the decisions that obviously we have to make sure that Australians don't miss the biggest events.
What we're talking about here, and it sounds a bit crass, particularly when we've discussed how much you love sport, I love sport, we all love sport, we all like to win gold medals, but the Olympics is a product, essentially. It's packaged up, it's sold, first by the IOC, then by Channel 9. How does it work? I won't say their names, but your competitors are obviously going to want to report on the Olympics and report the news of what's happened. Yep. What are they allowed to show? Because it's always interesting with these events, if you do flick on to something other than 9, they want the footage that you've got. How does that work?
Well, there's restrictions. So obviously, due to the amount of money we spend on rights, the IOC makes sure that they police the restrictions. So other channels are allowed to show some action, but I think it's 3x3, which is 3 minutes 3 times a day. So they're restricted to usually using that during 6 o'clock news bulletins, for example, whereas we can show as much as we want. So, and this is where this Olympics is going to be it's not unique, but basically a lot of what's happening is happening overnight. So people will wake up the next morning and want to watch what's going on. The only place you'll be able to watch what's going on is on Channel 9, where we'll be making sure that whatever you missed while you were sleeping, you'll see when you wake up. And if you don't have time to sit in front of your television, then you'll be able to get it on the 9 Now app that I keep plugging. But that's because it's a one-stop shop to be able to get absolutely everything that you want.
What's your expectation of the level of interest in the Games?
Well, I mean, everyone remembers the last Olympic Games, but the last Olympic Games we were all in lockdown. And it was also in a perfect time zone where you could watch quite a lot of the Olympics. But people get excited about the Olympics. People love the Olympics. I've always said this about Australia, that we love proving ourselves against the rest of the world. We do. We always do.
And we're so little. We're such a small nation.
We always drag out the medal tally, and then we break it down into how many people are in this country versus how many people are in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. So it generates an enormous amount of national pride every single Olympics, and we love the stories that the Olympics brings up. We can all remember, heroes from Olympics past that you perhaps hadn't heard of prior to that 2 weeks of the Olympics, and then all of a sudden they're household names at the end of it. I mean, Chloe Esposito is one that springs to mind, who won a modern pentathlon, and no one had been known anything about modern pentathlon before Chloe won. And I remember back in Sydney 2000, was broadcasting that Games in radio when Lauren Burns won the taekwondo.
And I was thinking about the walker. Oh my God, Jane Saville.
Oh,
Jane Saville. Remember that moment? I'll never forget it.
I was not far away from where she was disqualified, actually. Yeah. And her tears at being 100 metres away from winning a gold medal will always live with me. Yeah. But there's all those sort of stories. The fact that you still remember 24 years later about Jane Saville just goes to show how much we live in the moment for 2 weeks of the Olympics.
We asked our listeners not long ago how interested they were in the Olympics, and 30% said, we'll absolutely watch everything, really excited about it. Yep. So I definitely know there's some, very hardcore supporters of the Olympics out there. I'm not sure if an EP can pick favourites, but what are you looking forward to? Like, is there something – I feel like we understand that in the pool that's going to be interesting and fun because
Yep.
we're very good.
Yep.
What outside of that are you most excited about?
Well, look, let's continue that theme that we were talking about a moment ago. It's the names that you haven't heard of now that you might be talking about in a month's time.
Who might they be?
Okay.
Who might they be, Murray?
Women's weightlifting, right? Born in Fiji, Eileen Sikamatana discovered she was going to be good at weightlifting because she worked on Dad's farm, and Dad would go, can you go and pick up that 50-kilogram feed bag and chuck it on the back of the truck when she was a young kid. Suddenly she realised that there might be a future in this and took up weightlifting. She represented Fiji at the Commonwealth Games and won a gold. She moved to Australia to continue her training and now is representing Australia. She's already won a Commonwealth Games gold for Fiji. She's also won one for Australia. She missed the last Olympics because she was in the process of changing her citizenship from Fiji to Australia, so she missed the last games.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough to go down and watch her train. She is absolutely delightful. I can't hope enough that she wins a gold medal in women's weightlifting on about the second last day of the competition. It'd be absolutely brilliant. So that's one name.
Yep.
Boxing, Teramwana. We probably all remember Harry Garside from the last Olympics and then his appearances on other reality shows. But this guy's in basically the super heavyweight category of the Olympics and is a really, really good chance for gold. So that's just two from some minor sports. But, you've got your Jess Foxes that people already know now. You've got all the swimmers. You've got the Matildas. But then you just throw in these great little stories of these people, as we said, who, are probably doing this sport not because it makes them a lot of money, but because they love it. And let's hope that they get success and let's hope that they can, get something out of it as well.
There are sports in the Olympics that I would assume are challenging for broadcast for a variety of reasons. I mean, even the surfing, for example, is in Tahiti. It's not actually in Paris, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
But even those, some of them I assume would be more challenging. What ones are, and how do you get around that and sort of dress them up so they are really entertaining?
Well, I think people are generally interested in the Olympics full stop. And gymnastics is another sport, for example, that people probably don't watch. I mean, I know it's massive in areas of Europe and obviously the United States as well, with people like Simone Biles who be at this Olympics as well. But people seem to love watching the gymnastics at the Olympics too.
Regardless of whether we're winning. I could attest to that. That'll be the thing I'll turn on even though an Aussie isn't in it.
Yeah. So and there's a lot of those sort of long form sports, like a session of gymnastics might go for 90 odd minutes, and a cycling road race might go for quite a few hours and that sort of things too. So, but again, Australians seem to sort of get into it, and it's obviously our job as television producers to make those events as exciting as they possibly can. So we do rely on the pictures that we get from OBS, but that doesn't mean that we won't try and track down the parents of a cyclist during a race and talk to them while the race is going on to see how they're feeling as their son or daughter strives for a gold medal too. So that's just part of the job of being a TV producer. For the team that we've got working on it.
I thought the swimming trials were fantastic.
So good.
So good. I cried every night watching those stories. So you're so right.
I don't want to interrupt you, but one of the great things about those swimming trials too was the reactions of the parents.
Oh, it was brilliant.
And they sort of brought the stories to life. And you might remember from the last Olympics too, parents and families weren't able to go. So we always had those sort of shots of them back at home celebrating with their families and that sort of stuff too. Fortunately over here, I think about 60 to 70% of the parents are actually going to try and get to Paris. And when I say parents, loved ones, wives, etc., are going to try and get there to be able to watch their people performing, but we also want to be able to capture the people who didn't. So we still want to bring all those great stories together, because some of the great Olympic memories are also about how proud the parents are and how proud they are of their
children and of the athletes.
Children. Yeah.
One of the other things about the swimming trials was obviously the Paralympians were competing at the same time.
Yep.
You are going to be on the ground in Paris for the Paralympics.
Yep.
How did you get that gig?
It's going to be great. I mean,
because I should clarify, you won't be in Paris in your role as EP of the Olympics for the Olympics. You'll be
because all the production, as I said, is remote production coming out of mostly out of Sydney. But fortunate enough to be able to go across to the Paralympics. But Alexa Leary became a household name during those swimming trials. Ahmed Kelly, Scooter there, and the way that multi-class races were embedded into the program, so that it wasn't one or the other. They were all part of it. It was so well done from Swimming Australia, and the coverage on Channel 9 was exceptional.
I'm interested just in you, as we finish up, doing a bit of reflecting, you've worked in this space for a really long time. I don't want to say really long. I mean, extensive career. But what's changed? Like, especially in the production of it, what has changed? I assume that technology advances. What to you really stands out?
Yeah, I mean, and it's all for the better, isn't it? It's when you think about it, like we talked about the actually ability to be able to watch the Olympics, and when we were sort of growing up that you had one channel and you just were stuck with whatever they decided was the best. But now if you want to watch something specifically, you can watch that. But it's even the way that, events are broadcast, and the fact that we can get cameras that are connected by internet to be able to bring pictures back immediately, rather than relying on satellite feeds, et cetera, et cetera. So all these have just made the viewing experience so much better for those people sitting in their lounge rooms. And the Olympics is the biggest sporting event in the world in terms of the amount of sport that's taking place over the 2.5 weeks, and just being able to bring that together, the technology that's been developed to be able to bring that all together and mould it all together and curate it together to be able to bring the best experience possible for the viewer.
What has been particularly challenging about the Paris Olympics, though? Has there been anything that has been difficult? Are they on track? Are you feeling organised?
Oh no, I read the same stories as you do.
I'm just curious
about the quality of water,
all of that stuff
down the Seine and things like that, and
even like a language barrier perhaps around your logistics and your organisation. I don't know. I just was kind of curious.
I mean, fortunately, we've obviously got the OBS who've been on the ground there for so long, helping sort of set those things up. But we've already got people on the ground ourselves who were there from weeks out, getting things ready. But I mentioned the Seine too. I mean, part of the beauty of this Paris Olympics is going to be the backdrops for some of these events. So the equestrian is taking place at the Palace of Versailles. You mentioned that the surfing in Chaupu in Tahiti, but there are also a lot of those youth sports are taking place at the Place de la Concorde, which is smack bang in the middle of the town. The beach volleyball taking place underneath the Eiffel Tower. I mean, the backdrop for something like that.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. So they've put a court next to the Eiffel Tower, so at night you can imagine what that's going to look like too. So people keep saying like the host of this Olympic Games being Paris is really going to turn it on in terms of how it looks.
How excited are you for Brisbane?
Well, can I get through these ones first? We've got, Brisbane's going to be enormous. I mean, as I said, I was fortunate enough to work on the Sydney Olympics, and what it did to that city, if it does the same for the city of Brisbane, when just everyone walks around with a smile on their face for 2.5 weeks and puts on a great show, because as we said before, Australians love proving themselves to the rest of the world, and Sydney was desperate to hear someone say this has been the greatest Olympics ever, and I'm sure Brisbane will be...
And it was said.
Yeah,
yes.
And it was said by Juan Antonio Samaranch, and I'm sure Brisbane will be desperate to hear those words again too, and people will work around the clock to make sure that happens. I'm very confident that they're going to deliver an amazing Olympics, because that's what Australians do.
I have one final question for you, which is really putting you on the spot, but I hope you've thought about it. I'm asking everyone about what they're hopeful about at the end of these series, but I'll position it differently for you. How many gold medals are you hoping we will win?
15.
15.
Yeah.
We might replay that at the end of the games and see what we got to.
Well, look, if we look at the recent World Championships, and I've just plucked that number out, but I've sort of had a rough guess.
Yeah.
If we look at the last World Championships in swimming, we did exceptionally well. I can't remember what the exact figure was, but it led everyone to go, oh, hang on, we're going to win a lot of medals at the Olympics. And we keep coming back to the swimming, but we've got an incredibly strong track and field team this time round, where we could actually win some gold medals in things like women's pole vault and women's high jump and men's discus and road walks. And that's just two sports. We haven't got into cycling, rowing. I mentioned women's weightlifting, boxing, taekwondo's another one, beach volleyball, sports like that. So there's a lot of Aussies with huge gold medal chances at this Games. I mean, let's cross our fingers and hope it's the most successful Games in terms of gold medals ever, because that would be great. But I think we're a red-hot chance.
Murray, thank you so much. All the best for it. Can't wait for it. As you said, all on 9 now. For anyone who wants to catch it all, it's basically... search for 9 and it'll be there for 2 whole weeks, I imagine, right up until the closing ceremony. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Murray. He's got a big job ahead of him, so I really appreciated his time. After we finished recording, I asked him how he was feeling about it all. Sometimes people give a bit more away once recording stops. Not Murray. He answered the same way he answered everything in this interview, with enthusiasm and excitement and a real love for the stories that will come out of the games, the triumphs and the disappointments. He is ready for it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Newsmakers. Another one will be out next week. And in the meantime, I'll be back alongside Claire with the weekly wrap on Saturday. If you're enjoying what we're doing with Newsmakers, leave us a review if you're listening on Apple, a comment if you're listening on Spotify. And I'll finish by just saying, come on, Aussie.